This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
Tonight, a special edition of Unsolved Mysteries. In the summer of 1991, 31-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer confessed to the unprovoked murders of 17 young men. Neighbors and co-workers who described Dahmer as a quiet loner were shocked by the revelations. In the 1980s, banking executives siphoned billions from the nation's S&Ls. Savings were diverted to fraudulent land schemes, luxury cars and yachts, prostitutes, and political slush funds. The rest of us will be repaying the debt well into the next century. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein murdered thousands of rivals in his rise to power. Though soundly defeated by Operation Desert Storm, he has re-emerged to threaten world stability. The central characters in these seemingly unrelated events share one disturbing trait: a cunning mind unrestrained by conscience. Some call them psychopaths, others call them sociopaths. We call them diabolical minds. Motherhood is above suspicion, unquestioned, sacred. So no one was surprised when Marie Hilley resolutely nursed her family through a series of debilitating illnesses. Nobody had any idea that Marie Hilley was poisoning her own family. From his prison cell, convicted murderer G. Daniel Walker terrorized a deputy district attorney who prosecuted him. Our exclusive interview with Walker paints a chilling portrait of the diabolical mind. In June 1989, a mother and her two daughters were sexually assaulted, then dumped, still alive, into Tampa Bay. Perhaps you can help identify the killer, who authorities believe will continue to rape and murder. Tonight in this special presentation, we will explore the mysteries of a frightening phenomenon, the mysteries of the diabolical mind. Join me. The words diabolical and psychopath bring to mind the lurid villains from horror movies, out of control, glassy-eyed, unkempt maniacs. Real-life psychopaths bear little resemblance to these movie madmen. They hold jobs, shop for groceries, and appear no different than the rest of us, most of the time.
Only the minority of psychopaths are actually violent. There are people who are vice presidents of corporations, who step over the competition, whose backstabbing is only figurative.
One of the social dangers that psychopathic individuals perpetuate is that oftentimes, especially if they're brighter than average or perhaps very intelligent, that they can fool individuals into believing that they are quite sincere and are being quite honest.
Even psychopaths who murder, such as serial killer John Wayne Gacy, might stand next to you in line at the post office without drawing your attention.
John Wayne Gacy's an interesting case in Chicago. A respectable, responsible figure, was a clown at children's parties, active in the political party of his time, photographed with the president and the president's wife. But all the while this was going on, he was systematically luring into his house and then hideously torturing and killing young men, and then burying them under his home.
Ted Bundy also appeared to be a pillar of society. At various times before his arrest and execution, he was a counselor on a rape crisis hotline, a campaign aide to Washington Governor Dan Evans, and in 1972, Ted Bundy was named Mr. Up-and-Coming Republican.
Two very well-known journalists described Ted Bundy, for example, as a kind of alien life form mimicking the behavior of real human beings. A lot of psychopaths don't just kill individuals. They're not content with that. A lot of psychopaths run countries. I see no fundamental difference between someone like Ted Bundy and someone like Adolf Hitler, who simply used very different techniques for very similar ends. All that mattered to them was control and domination, in the one case of a single isolated individual, in another of an entire nation. And the ruthless annihilation of millions meant nothing.
The most destructive psychopaths are those very few who achieve and hold on to absolute political power. The force of authority, combined with a diabolical mind, almost inevitably leads to an epic and horrifying rampage. In these rare home movies, Adolf Hitler appears no more threatening than a prosperous Bavarian country gentleman, a friend of dogs and small children. And yet, Hitler was certainly the most heinous psychopath of all time. What drove Hitler to systematically murder 6 million Jews and decimate most of Europe?
One of the more common prevalent theories today is that there's a lack of bonding between the parent and the child in the very early years. The sociopath grows up feeling unloved, out of control. And when he grows up, he has an intense need for control over other people.
Hitler's father was 52 years old when Hitler was born. Many believe his physical and emotional abuse virtually destroyed his son's self-esteem. As an adult, Adolf Hitler felt compelled to subjugate millions to avenge his own deep feelings of inferiority.
Psychopaths kill because that is the ultimate act of humiliation and dominance that shows their total power and control over another human being. It's the ultimate achievement of their psychopathic dreams.
Und wir werden in unserem Zeichen wiedersehen.
Amidst the wreckage and misery that he unleashed on Europe, Hitler displayed the psychopath's most chilling trait, a total absence of empathy for his victims.
For the psychopath, the world is a smorgasbord from which he can select whatever food he wants to eat. There's no reciprocity. There's no empathy for who he victimizes. It is something that he intentionally does, and it's choices that he makes day in and day out as to who he will manipulate.
More recently, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein ordered the invasion of Kuwait, the latest episode in a political career marked by bloodletting and treachery.
Saddam has an extremely dangerous personality, but he is not crazy in the sense of being committable to a mental institution. This is the kind of person in a court of law who would not be considered not guilty by reason of insanity, but the recommendation of the examining psychiatrist would undoubtedly be to throw away the key.
Saddam Hussein grew up in an impoverished, almost medieval village that lacked electricity and running water. He was frequently beaten by his stepfather, kept out of school, and forced to help support his family by stealing chickens and sheep. Like Hitler, Hussein exploited a turbulent political climate to legitimize his personal need to dominate and control others.
Along the way, what he learned and what was reinforced regularly was that violence is the key to power.
During the 1960s and 70s, Hussein methodically eliminated political rivals, torturing and murdering thousands. By July of 1979, Hussein inspired so much fear that he was able to gain the presidency simply by asking for it. Within days, Hussein summoned his leading supporters to a meeting where he charged a number of potential rivals with treason. This crude video footage was smuggled out of Iraq and shows several of the accused being led from the meeting. After the meeting, Hussein forced those not identified as conspirators to execute their former colleagues.
A striking example of the dangers of criticizing Saddam occurred in 1982. The war with Iran that Saddam had initiated was going very badly, and Saddam decided they had to stop it. But by now, Khomeini was obsessed with Saddam and said there would be no peace until Saddam was deposed or stepped down. Saddam called a cabinet meeting, asked his cabinet, "What shall we do?" Khomeini insists I step down. To a man, of course, the cabinet said, "You must stay on, we need your leadership." Saddam then said, no, I want your frank, candid, and creative suggestions. His Oxford-educated Minister of Health, Dr. Ibrahim, took him seriously and made a rather shrewd suggestion. "Why," he suggested, "don't we have you step down temporarily, Saddam, until our goal of peace is established, and then you can resume the presidency?" As the story is told, Saddam thanked him for his candor and then had him arrested. The minister's wife pled with Saddam to return her husband to her. He promised her that he would. As best as I can tell, the only promise he ever kept. The next day, he returned her husband to her in a black canvas bag, chopped into pieces.
With his critics effectively silenced, Hussein launched his ill-fated invasion of Kuwait. When he ultimately surrendered, Hussein promised to terminate production of all chemical and nuclear weapons. Subsequent United Nations inspections confirmed that Hussein was lying.
If one were to strip world leaders and politicians of narcissistic characters, the ranks would be perilously thinned. We must always be alert to that fusion between that personal drive for power, unconstrained by conscience, when it meets a wounded population. That has repetitively, over history, led to some of the most violent episodes that have scarred our planet.
History has shown that political psychopaths will not mellow into wise and magnanimous leaders. Most, like Adolf Hitler, perish in the flames they help ignite. Some, like Idi Amin, are deposed and live a quiet retirement in exile. A few, such as Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union, die of old age with their iron grip still strong. The ultimate fate of Saddam Hussein remains a question. When we return, a case study of a different kind, the female diabolical mind. It may not surprise you that 95% of all serial killers and mass murderers are men. As one expert has said, if you're looking for a diabolical gender, it is the male. There are, however, a few diabolical women. Typically, these sociopaths conceal their true nature behind a veil of tenderness and warmth. Frank and Marie Hilley were high school sweethearts. They were married in 1950, and the life they built together was the envy of friends and neighbors in Anniston, Alabama.
Here we go.
By 1971, Frank had worked his way up from shipping clerk to supervisor at the local foundry. The Hilleys had 2 children, Carol 11 and Mike 18. Aside from her tendency to overspend, Marie was a cheerful and supportive partner, by all appearances the perfect wife and mother.
Well, let's eat.
But appearances deceive.
I first started getting sick when I was 18. A lot of stomach problems. And I started having those problems about 2 or 3 months after an insurance policy was taken out on me for $25,000.
Sweetheart, you're not feeling any better, are you? Oh, honey, you are still just burning up.
My stomach hurts.
Does it still?
Mike's doctors are unable to diagnose or cure his persistent stomach ailments.
What could be wrong?
Curiously, once Mike left home for college, the symptoms disappeared. And curiously, with Mike away from home, his father developed a mysterious stomach ailment. Once again, doctors are unable to find a cause or provide a cure. At the same time, Frank and Marie's marriage was falling apart.
My father called me one day and had something he wanted to talk to me about. He had come home from work early one day and had found my mother in bed with one of her employers. I think my father was going to divorce her.
Whatever you do.
I think that was one circumstance that she just wouldn't allow to happen.
I love you too, Pop.
She placed a high value on prominence and reputation. And to go through a divorce would have destroyed that.
Within 2 weeks of confiding in Mike, Frank Hilley's mysterious disorder suddenly worsened. Frank was admitted to the local hospital. Marie rarely left his side, tenderly feeding and caring for him.
I'm so sick, Mother.
You've got to eat, Frank.
I remember thinking to myself, maybe this is the catalyst that will put them back together.
Don't you talk that way.
Maybe his illness will bring them closer together.
Frank, I am here for you, and together we are going to make it.
Frank Hilley died on May 25, 1975. The official cause of death was hepatitis. Nobody suspected the truth.
What's important to understand is that these people who seem so loving, love in a very odd way. The sociopath will love you for what you do for them, not for who you are and what you are. Whenever you become no longer necessary to their lives, they will throw you away. And if that has to be through murder, so be it.
Marie spent little time mourning for her husband. The proceeds from Frank's life insurance total more than $30,000. Marie quickly refurnished her house, bought a new car, and draped herself in expensive jewels and fashions. When the money ran out, Marie kept spending.
We became aware that Marie was having financial problems. There were various businesses filing complaints on her for insufficient checks that she had written to cover various purchases. There were some deals with automobiles that she had made that fell through and weren't paid for. Just a lot of little things that began to add up to flag our attention.
She owed more than she had. She couldn't pay her bills. My mother's finances were in terrible shape. I began to receive phone calls from creditors wanting the money. So she was getting all of these things with the promise to her creditors that I would pay for them.
4 years after her father's death, 18-year-old Carroll Hilley suddenly became sick. Nobody thought to connect her illness to Marie's financial problems. But nobody knew that Marie had insured Carroll's life for $25,000.
During the time that everyone was getting sick, I think the time between those illnesses was sufficient enough not to cause anybody to question what was going on. However, in each individual case, I think someone, a relative in the family, suspected that something was going on, and like me later on, something is, but what?
Shortly after Carroll became ill, Mike returned to Anniston to confront Marie about her overspending.
No. We are going to the bank and cash in Daddy's stocks so that you can pay me the money that you owe me.
I won't do anything like that. That is all the money I have in the world, and I will not spend it.
Mom, the creditors are calling me 3 times a day.
Mike was now living in Florida. He had a wife and young baby of his own, and Marie's appetite for expensive possessions threatened his family.
Mother?
I said, if I have to pick you up and physically put you in the car, we're going to the bank. There are no questions. Right after breakfast, which she cooked, I got about as sick as I'd ever been in my life.
So sorry.
Oh, I don't want to stay here anymore.
No, darling.
Mike recovered quickly and returned to Florida, but Carol's condition steadily worsened.
Well, last night I talked to my friend Ellen, who's the registered nurse, and she says they have this new medicine at her clinic that she thinks might help you.
Can you get me some?
Well,
Carroll was in and out of the hospital for 6 months and finally became paralyzed from the waist down.
The only thing is...
Still, doctors were unable to diagnose her illness.
You promise you won't tell a soul?
I promise I won't tell anybody.
All right then, baby. I'll give you some. Now let's see here. You need to turn over for me because I'm going to have to do like an injection in your hip.
Carol became increasingly sicker and weaker. Although I didn't see her at that time, I only heard from my mother and my aunt.
Okay, sweetie, this is going to sting a little bit.
I remember my aunt telling me that my mother had Carol in seclusion, would not let anybody see her, would not let anyone talk to her, and if something didn't happen, Carol was going to die.
All right, now, sweetheart, I really think that'll help you. I do.
When we find a woman who is a sociopath, we find an individual who leads a double life, who fools and manipulates family and friends. No one suspects. In fact, she's often the last person you'd suspect at all.
Well, how can I help you, Detective?
On September 20th, 1979, Marie's facade of innocence began to fracture. While at the hospital tending Carol, Marie was arrested for passing bad checks. Anniston police didn't realize that the arrest probably saved Carol's life.
One of Carol's friends at that time told me that she had visited Carol that day, and Carol had mentioned something about injections that my mother had given her.
Yeah, just look straight ahead for me, would you? Mm-hmm, that's good.
Mike demanded that the hospital staff re-examine Carol.
How'd you sleep last night?
Okay.
Doctors checked for a telltale sign of arsenic poisoning. Unmistakable white lines across the fingernails.
The world, as I knew it at that point, just fell apart. Everything that I had been taught to rely on was totally in question. Everything that my mother had taught me, right from wrong, I had to go back and re-examine.
Mike Hilley was forced to confront the unspeakable. His mother probably murdered his father. In October of 1979, at Mike's request, and surprisingly with Marie's permission, Frank Hilley's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. Marie quietly slipped out of town 3 weeks before the autopsy results were released. The revised cause of death, arsenic poisoning. On January 11th, 1980, an arrest warrant was issued, charging Marie with the murder of her husband. But by then, Marie Hilley had disappeared. At about the same time, 700 miles from Anniston, a romance blossomed in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Marie Hilley had resurfaced, flaunting a new identity, Robbie Hannon.
John, could I have a light?
Oh, sure.
John Holman, recently arrived from New Hampshire, was pleased to meet her.
So, Robbie, right?
Mm-hmm.
What brings you to sunny Florida?
Oh, just wanted to take a little vacation, get away from the past.
I understand that. Where are you from?
Oh, just a little town in Texas.
Robbie told John she was a widow and was soon to inherit a vast estate.
Married?
She also revealed she had a life-threatening brain cancer.
But hey, enough about me. Well, how about you?
There's not much to tell, I'm afraid.
Sociopaths tend to be very good actors. They know how to play the script of life, and they know how to capitalize upon the needs and vulnerabilities of others.
New Hampshire, all that snow.
The Robbie Hannon character was skillfully and deliberately created. She was attractive. She was available. She was going to be rich, and she might die sometime in the future. The possibilities seemed endless. Robbie and John were married in May of 1981. She found work as a secretary and was welcomed into the quiet social fabric of Marlow, New Hampshire.
Pastor, how are you?
John Holman, good to see you again.
Thank you.
And who do we have here?
Pastor, I'd like for you to meet my wife, Robbie Holman.
Very pleased to meet you, Robbie.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, Pastor.
By all accounts, John and Robbie shared a quiet and contented marriage. Then in September of 1982, Robbie informed John that her brain cancer had worsened. She flew alone to Texas for special medical tests. John Holman never saw Robbie again.
He got a call sometime later from an individual who identified herself as Robbie Hannon's twin sister, Terry Martin. She also advised Mr. Holman that Robbie had died and the body had been donated to science and all the arrangements had been made, so there was nothing for him to do.
Several weeks later, Terry Martin, Robbie's sister, came to New Hampshire. She brought an emotional farewell letter Robbie had written to John just before she died.
Terry?
You must be John. I'm Terry Martin, Robbie's sister. Oh, I'm sorry, John. I thought you knew we were twins.
I guess I knew, but I had no idea.
Identical twins, why?
Marie Hilley had lost 20 pounds, dyed her hair blonde, and boldly returned to New Hampshire as her own twin sister. John Holman accepted Terry at face value. She moved in with him, and they lived together for 2 months. However, some of John's neighbors were suspicious and attempted to verify Terry's story. Nothing checked out. Marie Hilley was ultimately trapped by an unlikely coincidence. Her age and description just happened to match one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. On January 18, 1983, Terry Martin was taken into custody for questioning.
After she was picked up, they had no idea that she was actually Marie Hilley and that she was wanted in Alabama for murder and attempted to poison her daughter. Once she was picked up, then they learned who in fact she really was.
Marie Hilley was sentenced to life plus 20 years. In the winter of 1987, she escaped from prison, only to die 7 days later from prolonged exposure to the cold. Marie Hilley was 53 years old.
My mother had a lot of charisma and charm, and she knew how to use that. She had the ability to make you believe what she was saying, even if you knew that it was an outright lie. She had the ability to make you believe that you were the most important thing in her life. And that could have been the furthest thing from the truth.
What inner forces polluted Marie Hilley's natural bonds with her husband and children? How could a wife and mother regard her own family members as little more than economic resources to be exploited? Like so many diabolical personalities, Marie Hilley remains a mystery. When we return, a disturbing face-to-face confrontation with a diabolical mind. An interview with convicted murderer G. Daniel Walker.
How long is your rap sheet? I would think the current one would probably be about 29 to 30 pages.
29 to 30 pages. Yeah. Charles Manson's only 5.
Well, he was just a killer.
Words, collections of letters, some bearing an emotional charge, others as neutral as air, perhaps providing a window to the inner workings of the diabolical mind.
How you doing, Steve?
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay, remember the instructions now. Each time you
Based on test responses to emotional and non-emotional words, Dr. Robert Hare in Canada believes that this normal subject can be distinguished from a psychopath. Sensitive electronic instruments show that a normal person responds faster to emotionally charged words than to words that are neutral. But psychopaths do not make this distinction. Dr. Hare believes this may help explain why psychopaths don't have a conscience.
Most people talk about conscience in terms of something like an inner voice talking to oneself. Well, I shouldn't do that. You know, my mommy said I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't do it. And after a while, it becomes sort of automatic. We do that. We refer to that as conscience. I would say that the psychopath probably doesn't have the same sort of inner voice that most people have. It may be that the language processes or the ability of language to actually control behavior is different in the psychopath than it is in other people.
Dr. Hare's experiment is just one attempt to unravel the most vexing mystery of the diabolical mind. Are certain people born as psychopaths, or do they become psychopaths?
If I were to cast my vote in one direction or the other, I'd probably say that it's more likely that they're born, not made. I think that there are fairly strong genetic contributions to all personality traits, including the personality traits that make up psychopathy.
I think it's pretty clear that while people may have a inherited susceptibility to certain kinds of violent crimes, that individuals who go on to produce these kinds of abominable crimes are created. They're shaped by their families, they're shaped by their societies, they model the culture heroes in their civilization, and they go on to commit these abominable acts.
Experts are still years away from understanding the mind of the psychopath. For a close-up look at the baffling enigma of such a personality, Unsolved Mysteries traveled to Northern California to interview convicted murderer G. Daniel Walker. While he is not a serial killer, Walker is, without doubt, a diabolical mind. At the time of the interview, G. Daniel Walker was probably the only prisoner in California with his own courthouse workspace, including a computer. Privileges resulting from a lawsuit against the state prison system. Over a 3-year period, Walker was driven several times a week to the Alameda County Courthouse, where he prepared still more lawsuits against judges, district attorneys, journalists, and corrections officials. He is almost as much trouble inside prison as out.
Good morning, all. A funny thing happened to me on the way to this interview. I got arrested, put in chains, and I'm not the defendant in this case.
Walker projects a buoyant, confident manner. This amiable posture belies the fraud, armed robberies, and murder which have kept him institutionalized for most of the past 35 years. G. Daniel Walker served time in the late 1960s for armed robbery and the attempted murder of an Illinois policeman. In 1972, he escaped. 3 months later, he was arrested in California for the murder of advertising executive William Ashlock. After the killing, Walker allegedly raped Ashlock's fiancée, all the while proclaiming his love for her. He then terrorized her into helping him cover up the crime. Walker defended himself in court, claiming Ashlock was a victim of a mafia hit squad. Walker insisted that he had only helped to cover up the murder to protect Ashlock's fiancée. He lost his case and received a sentence of 17 years to life in prison. While Walker insists he is innocent of the murder charge, he openly boasts of having committed more than 300 other crimes for which he has neither been charged nor tried.
Do you feel that you are pretty much by the system where you belong from the standpoint of...
Yes. I'm convicted of murder. I've always denied that I was the one that did the actual shooting in that particular case, but I've taken a witness stand.
Walker was interviewed by former FBI criminal profiler Robert RESSLER.
In concealing the crime, and given the same set of facts, I would do it again.
How long is your rap sheet?
I would think the current one would probably be about 29 to 30 pages.
29 to 30 pages.
Yeah.
Charles Manson's is only 5.
Well, he was just a killer.
But yeah, at the same time, I've heard you say that your criminal record, your rap sheet, your FBI record, whatever, does not certainly hold all that you have done.
Definitely not. No, the body of work of the criminal enterprise has been much greater, and let's hope that I've been successful in some things. See, you're meeting a failed criminal right now, and you're very happy to be meeting me as a failed criminal, because if you were meeting me as a successful criminal, it means that I'd have the gun pointed at you, and you would suddenly have this...
A person like him can be extremely dangerous. He doesn't buy our system. He does not buy our society's rules as we establish them. And again, that's a mark of a psychopath or a sociopath, is that they make their own rules in life. You have had so many opportunities to stay out of jail, and yet you keep coming back in.
Well, then again, you see prison as not being successful. And just because you're in prison doesn't mean you can't be successful. I think Solzhenitsyn said the greatest freedom that a man enjoys is being in prison, because they feed you breakfast in the morning, you can go out and kill one of your cellmates, and they'll still feed you lunch and give you sheets for your bed in the evening.
The psychopathic individual will use several different defenses. One of those is rationalization. He will come up with very elaborate explanations that, when thought about very carefully, make no sense.
Institutions are not that unsatisfying. You got to remember, I don't have to go out and kill any cows. They're going to do all that for me. I don't have to go out and cook any meals. I don't have to wash any dishes. They're going to do all those things for me. So the institution becomes a wife by nature. They're going to wash my dirty socks for me. They're going to do all of the things that I don't necessarily like to do. So if that's becoming institutionalized, I'm happily married.
If you had the option, would you leave?
I've had the option to escape. I have escaped, as you know. Juries have tried me and never found me guilty of escape. I've always represented myself in those cases. There is a certain excitement when you have escaped from a major penitentiary and you know that the red lights are right behind you, you know the sirens are going. There is a certain excitement that it's better than sex. So yes, there is that possibility that there may be a 14th escape.
You know, I've heard that before from other people.
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah, the excitement is a high factor in maintaining a life the way you have.
And oftentimes you'll find that the people that are pursuing you will lose the scent, so you have to go back and show them, no, you've got to turn this way, fellas, you know, to keep the chase going. And I've done that.
They will draw the interview into what we call a narcissistic twinship, where they will try to do things to show in what ways they are similar to the interviewer. And oftentimes the interviewer is both flattered and caught off guard.
You know, the minute you've taken down a perpetrator and you've taken him down, that you guys get together and give the high five and say, good God, we did that. Oh, that was a great job, you know? Well, the criminals do the same thing. The minute that you've outwitted them, you get together, give the high five and say, oh, we got over on them.
Are you saying there's just a fine line between you and I, then?
Very fine line, and you know it.
Do you have any true feelings of remorse?
Well, I would have to say, take a different tangent on that. Do I have remorse for the things that put me there? We have to remember that the crime that I'm in prison for, I defended myself. So I'm the one that lost that case. So I have remorse that I didn't handle that case in a little different way. As far as
the psychopathic individual will engage in a psychology of reversals. Pain originates in other people, problems originate in other people, and responsibility for our behavior is really other people's responsibility.
Do you feel that you are a truly dangerous person from the standpoint of committing violent acts?
Only if you've done something wrong to me. I think what you're referring to is the fact
From prison, Walker somehow managed to have a highly toxic poison imported into the United States. A deputy district attorney who had once prosecuted Walker became terrified that he might be Walker's target.
System where it can't be traced. So when suddenly the system discovered that I had 2.2 pounds of poison in the United States, they went crazy. Like, what does G. Daniel Walker want with this poison? Well, the little lady that lives in Dubuque, Iowa, that has an antique collection that's never heard of the name G. Daniel Walker, knew that I didn't have that poison for her, so she had no concern. There were a lot of deputy attorney generals, a lot of assistant United States attorneys that suddenly became very uncomfortable, and there were a lot of judges that became uncomfortable. And they started a major investigation. They indicted me, a two-count indictment for importing this poison. They spent about $1,300,000 working up a prosecution, and then they folded their tent because they found out that I hadn't broken the law.
Did you use poison?
They've never found any sufficient evidence to charge me with having used it, but it certainly caused one deputy attorney general in the state of California to go through his cabinets and take all ingestible items out, toothpaste and liquor, and finally his wife said, well, gee, it could be in the carpet, so they recarpeted their home, and finally they sold the home and moved.
So in other words, creating paranoia in a person can be oftentimes even more insidious than just making verbal threats.
It's a better gamesmanship than doing physical violence, because fear lives with you 24 hours a day. Fear never goes away. If you kill somebody, that's over.
Or attempt to kill somebody.
Yes, or if you hurt them, you know, and as long as the pain is there, that's, but fear is a pain that lives with you forever.
Since 1977, G. Daniel Walker has been denied parole 7 times. If the state does grant him parole on the murder charge, Walker still faces a 50-year term on federal charges stemming from credit card frauds he committed from inside prison. When we return, FBI and Florida investigators track an elusive, diabolical killer. On May 26, 1989, Joanne Rogers and her daughters, Michelle, 17, and Christy, 14, left their farm in Wilshire, Ohio, for a long-anticipated vacation in Florida. They visited the zoo in Jacksonville, then drove to Kennedy Space Center, Disney World, and the Epcot Center before arriving in Tampa on June 1st, a Thursday.
Boy, long trip. Michelle, would you
There, the Rogers' carefree vacation came to a sudden and horrifying end.
I knew they were supposed to be back maybe on Saturday, Sunday, maybe a Monday. But Tuesday morning, I got a little concerned about it. And I called her mom, and she hadn't even called her. And I knew something had happened then, because she's not the type that don't call. I just figured she couldn't get a hold of me. And that's when I think I reported them missing.
On the same day Hal Rogers expected his family to return home, the bodies of 3 unidentified women floated to the surface of Tampa Bay. Each had been bound with tape, weighted with a cinder block, and dumped into the bay, still alive. All 3 had apparently been sexually assaulted.
2, 3, go.
The victims were Joanne, Michelle, and Christy Rogers. Once again, authorities were confronted with a grim harvest of an unknown psychopathic killer.
Male serial killers are so difficult to apprehend. They kill strangers, unknown motive, no crime scene, no fingerprints, no other physical evidence, usually only a dump site. And that is the modus operandi of the male serial killer.
The murders of Joanne, Michelle, and Christy were classic psychopathic killings, cunningly conceived and executed without remorse. The maddening scarcity of evidence has limited authorities to assumptions and speculation. Without a name, face, or fingerprint, police have attempted to construct the profile of a killer. It is, at best, a slow, frustrating process. Tampa Bay was the final stop on the Rogers itinerary before they returned to Ohio.
Christy, wasn't that last place we went and eat?
Oh, yeah.
Did you love it?
Joanne, Michelle, and Christy checked into their motel around noon on June 1st. Within hours, fate and happenstance brought them into the range of a lurking killer.
We believe that they were victims of opportunity. What that means basically is he surveilled them. He knew that they were the ones that he wanted to approach, and he had planned this, but it wasn't that much in advance because the circumstances of their travels wouldn't lend to that.
Authorities believe that in order to bring Joanne and her daughters under his control, the killer first had to overcome their natural suspicions.
We feel that the offender presented himself in a very non-threatening manner. Something where he made it enticing or inviting to them, struck up a conversation, and that in his physical appearance he was probably pleasing to look at, someone that they felt comfortable with.
Lieutenant, it appears to be the car. It's a 2-door, Olds, blue in color. Give me a photograph of that.
On June the 8th, the Rogers car was found at a boat ramp near their motel. Inside was a sinister hint that the women had been entrapped.
We found a note in that vehicle that indicated directions for the victims to go to the boat ramp and to meet someone there with something that's blue/white. That would lead us to believe that they went there to meet a blue and white boat.
Police are convinced that Joanne Rogers and the 2 girls were lured to their deaths, probably by the promise of an innocent boat ride, and probably by more than one assailant.
Hi, how you doing today? Let me give you a hand.
They got on the boat with this person or these people, and at that time I'm sure they felt very safe. with him, and that was the killer's plan.
This is terrific.
This is great, huh? He knew what he was going to do to those victims before they ever got on this boat.
Okay.
We think a person like this will kill again, in all probability has killed again. However, we think that he was surprised that the bodies surfaced as quickly as they did, and in his killing subsequent to this, he will change his manner and his method of disposal of any bodies.
The psychological profile of the killer has provided investigators with some insights into this ugly crime, but has failed to pinpoint a specific suspect. Police have only a few admittedly slim leads that might result in the capture of this confident and ruthless psychopath. A guest at the motel on the day of the Rogers death reported seeing a young, well-groomed white male loading a cooler into a white boat with dark blue racing stripes. The boat was towed by a dark-colored Chevy Blazer or Ford Bronco. Efforts to locate this person have so far been unsuccessful. It is easy to feel overwhelmed and frightened by the many faces of the sociopath. The immediacy of television makes us feel as though every murder, every horror is happening right down the block. In reality, violent psychopaths are an extreme rarity, and fortunately, few of us will ever encounter one. There is still much to learn about this disturbing phenomenon in terms of identifying it, predicting it, and preventing it. Thank you for joining us, and please join us next time for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.